This Face Your Fear challenge that the Pain Psychology started doing this past week made me really inspired to make a video about facing your fears, just talking more about how to actually do that, practically speaking, because it's one of those things where it's like, oh, there are all these memes on the internet or scroll through Instagram, these ideas about facing your fears, but it's kind of hard to know how exactly do you do that. And it made me think of this Pema Chodron story that she tells. It's one of my favorite stories. And it's this story about this young warrior whose teacher tells her that she has to do battle with fear. And so she is really nervous about that. She doesn't want to do it, but decides, okay, I'm going to do this. And the day comes for her to do battle, and she's on one side and fear's on the other. And she comes to fear and she bows down 3 times and she says to fear, may I have permission to do battle with you? Fear says, thank you so much for showing me so much respect. Yes, you may. And the young warrior asks, how do I defeat you? And fear says, well, my weapons are that I talk very fast and I get very close to your face. And then when you are unnerved, then you do what I say, and that's how I always win. And so the secret to defeating me is, you can listen to what I say, you can even be frightened by it, but the secret to defeating me is you just don't do what I say. And I love that way of thinking about fear because really from a neuroscience perspective, that is what happens with fear. It completely unnerves us so that when our amygdala, this more primitive part of the brain, is fired up and ready to go and generating that fight or flight response, really what's happening is that our prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that helps calm everything down and can see ahead, can anticipate consequences, that part goes offline. And you've probably noticed that at times when you felt really fearful that it's like your rational brain stops working, and that literally is what happens. Your vision literally narrows when your amygdala is really activated. And so part of the trick for facing fear is to actually name what's happening, name the fear if possible, because that naming that fear is what pulls this part of the brain back online and enables you to think more clearly, more creatively, more adaptively. I think it's also really helpful to think of courage as a muscle. Courage, if you've read anything about fear or phobias, you're probably aware that the evidence-based treatment for phobias is exposure therapy. You start in small ways, say like you have arachnophobia, you have a fear of spiders. So maybe you start by looking at pictures of cute cartoon spiders, something innocuous, and gradually work your way up to more and more direct encounters with spiders. Because what's happening with fear in the brain is that fear affects memory. So when we encounter a scary stimulus, it affects the way that memory is stored in the brain because there's a really strong evolutionary advantage to remembering things that hurt us. Now, this makes so much sense, or would have made so much sense 10,000 years ago, because it's so valuable to remember which berries are poisonous, where the tigers live, what hole in the ground this poisonous snakes come out of. You want that seared and burned into your memory. Now, here in our present day environment where most of us most of the time are not experiencing direct threats to our safety, and where our brains are processing social and emotional threats using the same pathways as physical threats, that is less advantageous, and it makes it so that sometimes our brains are reacting to situations that aren't actually threatening to our physical safety, but they're processing them in the same way. So, kind of going back to this idea of exposure therapy, It's so vital in terms of rewiring the memory that got stored of this thing is a threat, it's dangerous to my safety, to gradually expose yourself in safe, manageable ways where you are consciously, mindfully taking steps to manage your anxiety as you're doing it. Because if you're putting yourself in the situation without being gentle and kind with yourself, it's only going to strengthen that wiring around, oh my God, this thing is a threat. But if you can do it in gentle ways where you are soothing yourself, where you're naming the fear, oh, like I'm so scared that this spider is going to jump on me. That's what's going to enable your brain to store this memory in a new, less threatening way. And so this courage really is this muscle that you can grow over time by slowly exposing yourself to the things that you're scared of. And this is why I love this Face Your Fear challenge that the Pain Psychology Center is doing, because it's kind of putting it out there, these things that that we become afraid of, and maybe there's not even really that much of a threat, but I think it's so helpful to see people actually facing their fears in manageable ways, that this is something that you can do too. And this is how you grow this muscle of courage. It's not something that you can think your way into being braver, just as you can't think your way into loving yourself more. It's something that you have to act your way into it by gently taking steps to face the things that scare you. So if right now that sounds overwhelming and daunting, maybe it sounds manageable. Maybe that's something that you can think of, something right away that you could do that scares you. And really, I think that's the way to think of it, right? That if we want to grow this muscle of courage in our lives, we should consider doing things every day that scare us. And they don't have to be huge things like base jumping or, bungee jumping or whatever. It's like you could do something like making yourself vulnerable to by asking for help, or admitting you don't know the answer, or saying sorry and making amends for something. Any of those things would be small, manageable ways. Or, doing something where you might face rejection. Wow, like that's such a powerful way of retraining the way that you relate to fear. There's this great Invisibilia episode about fear where they tell this story of this guy who found himself in this situation where his marriage had ended, his wife had left him, he was just in a really dark place, and he realized that the thing that was really holding him back was this deep-seated fear of rejection. And so he made this conscious choice that I'm going to expose myself to rejection over and over as much as possible so that I can be liberated from this fear, because it really is a type of shackles. And so he made this deck of cards, of rejection cards, with tasks that he could draw a card and it would tell him what to do, like going up to a stranger and asking for a ride, or calling somebody that he wasn't close to and asking for a favor. Things that there was a very good chance that the person was going to say no, and that it brought a lot of anxiety to him to think of being rejected. But by putting himself out there over and over again, he really liberated himself from that fear and grew that muscle of courage. So I would encourage you to think of something small every day that you can do for yourself in order to change your relationship to fear, to really give yourself that direct experience of feeling what it's like to feel those sensations of fear in your body, your heart rate speeding up, maybe the sweatiness of your palms, and being with them in a different way, not listening to what that fear says and shutting down and trying to protect yourself, but instead opening up to the experience and letting yourself be vulnerable to it, and really retraining the way that your brain perceives fear. If you, after listening to this, have ideas of how you'd like to face fears, but you just aren't sure how to go about doing it, I would love to hear from you. This is something that I love working with. You can email me through my website. You could fill out the contact form, or you can comment on this video on my Facebook page. Yeah, so, or I would love to see videos that people are posting. If you want to tag me in it, Mind, Body, Heart Therapy, or tag the Pain Psychology Center using the hashtag FaceYourFearChallenge. Thanks for watching.